Lance Dutson, this is the Advanced Team. Thanks for joining us again for episode 3 of the Advanced Team. We've got a great panel with us today, starting with Avery Day. We've got Ben Grant, Lizzy Reinholt, Bobby Reynolds, and again, I'm Lance Dutson. We are following up on our Friday afternoon show about the biggest story that's going around Augusta right now, which is the governor's proposed budget. Friday afternoon, we all chatted a little bit, and we had just kind of hours of exposure to this very complicated document. But now, after a couple days, everybody's kind of dug into it a little bit. It'll still be weeks until we really get a good picture of things. But I think we're going to dig down a little deeper and see what the movement on this thing is going to be over the next couple of weeks. So after looking at this for a little while, Avery, I'm going to talk to you about this first. This budget breaks down into a few core components. Basically, we're looking at an income tax reduction, pretty substantial, but not to zero as it was rumored. And that is going to be paid for in part by an expansion and an increase in the sales tax, among other things. And then the second major component is what I would say is a complete rehabilitation of the relationship of state government, local government, and property tax within the state of Maine. Have I pretty much got that summed up right, Avery?
Yeah, Lance, I think so. The story right out of the gate has been taxes, because that's sort of the most aggressive thing. If you took the tax reform right out of there, this would look like a budget for a state that is climbing out of a recession. You've got money trying to restore some of the gimmicks, the 37.5-hour work week back to 40, and that sort of the budget gimmicks that legislators often use are being restored. And you've got a few modest initiatives, $10 million for regionalization, trying to study that, or $10 million to try to move school consolidation along, a few of those things. But when you throw the taxes in on top of it, I mean, that really makes the whole story here.
So, Ben Grant, I want to hear your impressions of this thing, and I know, like everybody here, we're all just kind of looking at the edges and seeing what's in it. But you've got some great historical perspective on the arc of electoral politics in Augusta. What do you think about this budget at first glance?
Well, at first glance, the thing that comes to mind is, what is the Republican base going to say about this? To me, this budget contains a complete betrayal of the conservative principles that we've been hearing year after year after year. The mantra about no taxes. I'm just baffled that that's what went into this budget. I'm really interested to see what the conservative base has to say about it.
Now, Ben, I want to follow up on that because this is kind of the heart of the discussion about this, is how Republicans can turn around on this tax proposal. But, I mean, isn't a consumption-based tax a more conservative initiative than the alternative? I mean, wasn't it Democrats in 2010 that were kind of betraying their base?
Well, it's not more conservative than not raising taxes, period. The end, we'll never do it, no way, no how. It's not more conservative than that. So, in that comparison, maybe you're right. It is more conservative than income tax, but that's not the comparison that we're talking about.
So, Bobby Reynolds, if I'm right, if my memory is correct, Senate President Mike Thibodeau ran against and beat John Piotti, the architect of the Democrats' sales tax expansion in 2010, and he ran and won on this issue. I think he only won by about 200 votes this time around. What happens to a potentially vulnerable Senate president when he has to go back to his constituents and sell the opposite of what he got elected on?
Well, it wasn't just Mike Thibodeau. It was the entire Republican slate, both in the Senate and the House in 2010, basically at the behest of Charlie Webster, who was the spearhead in getting the people's veto on the ballot of 1495. They hammered Democrats incumbents who had voted to raise taxes on people who are going to get their hair cut, or were going to get their car fixed, or were going to get their oil burner work done. And you got to remember, 1495 wasn't the first inception of this. So that famous walk in the woods with Dick Nass and Ethan Strimling back earlier in the decade, where they attempted to work out of the taxation committee a similar idea, at least in principle, where you would broaden the base of sales tax to more than just the primary, lumber and automobiles that we currently tax on, which leads to a feast and famine. So I would throw it right back to Ben. How are Democrats currently in the legislature, how are they going to oppose this thing? This, for all intents and purposes, is a Democrat dream come true. We're broadening, raising the sales tax. So, let's not criticize Republicans. What are Democrats going to do here?
Well, that's way overstating the case about what the Democrats think. I mean, this does have a reduction in the income tax. Our side believes in progressive taxation. This goes away from that. We believe in trying to keep property taxes low, and I think this offends that belief as well. So to say this is a Democrat's dream come true is wildly overstating it.
So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's get honest here about what this budget does. Governor Baldacci's tax reform created 101 new taxes. From what I can count, Governor LePage's budget creates 204 new taxes. The Republicans ran against this in 2010. The Maine Heritage Policy Center, which is the think tank for conservative policy, has written more white papers against the sales tax increase or sales tax expansion that I can count on my hands. And beyond that, this is a complete slap in the face to rural middle-class Mainers. I mean, if you look at this budget, not only it reduces the income tax, but if you look at it, people making $50,001 are paying a higher income tax rate than people making $175,000, according to Governor LePage's newest budget. So I don't know how Republicans can justify that to working and middle-class Mainers, particularly in rural parts of the state, who helped elect them and helped them give them a majority back in the Senate. So as far as I'm concerned, this budget is a complete non-starter. And
so
it's
Avery, isn't what Lizzie's describing this little bubble bracket that is in the budget? Do you know what's the deal with that? I mean, it appears to me that rate is lopsided like that to compensate for a bigger hit that higher income brackets would take. Am I right about that?
Yeah, Lance, I don't have all my hands around it firmly, but it's as you move up in the bracket, some of the deductions and phase out. So it's to accompany or to compensate for that. The problem is, for folks looking just at the number, at the bottom line number, I think it's tough. Politically, it's a heavy lift to have those numbers right there for people to see, and their immediate take is going to be, well, this doesn't make any sense. And sometimes in politics, you don't have time to explain why it does make sense.
Well, I mean, let's be honest here. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't change the fact that middle-income earners are going to be paying a higher tax rate than the wealthiest among us. And, what are you supposed to do? Tell people, oh, it's okay. I know it looks that way, but just trust us. It's fair. I think inherently people don't trust the government. I think inherently we're used to Republicans trying to balance the budget on the backs of the middle class, and that's exactly what they're trying to do here.
Okay, so I think actually Lizzie's really right about something there, how difficult a sell it's going to be, because I remember distinctly in 2010 that John Piatti and Emily Kane had this calculator. They had an Excel spreadsheet that they were circulating around, and that was going to show everybody how much they were going to save from the new plan. And what they proved in real time is that that's too complicated a thing for people to try to understand this on a statewide basis. But Bobby, I want to go back to 2010. I worked for Charlie Webster for the Maine Republican Party. One of the funniest moments of my political life, Charlie called me into his office today and he said, you got to see this. And it was the first cut of what they called the baby tax ad. And they had a nurse there, and she was talking about these awful Democrats and these taxes they passed on all kinds of services, and even on having a baby. And I think that was one of the funniest commercials that I've ever seen. And I think what Charlie Webster did was really brilliant, because he took all these little bits and pieces around the edges, all these different special interest groups and professions, and he exploited their concern for having to collect sales tax, and he formed it into a coalition that ended up bringing the state government into the hands of Republicans for the first time in 50 years. Isn't that didn't Charlie Webster and Republicans give a blueprint to Democrats to use this time around?
Well, certainly. I got a feeling that there's this saying that there's no second acts in America, but Charlie Webster is going to be coming back, I think, for his second or his third act here. He's got this group called the Maine Citizens Coalition. Unwittingly, what Governor LePage may have done is opened up the door for the reemergence of Charlie Webster, one of the true characters of Maine politics. No matter where you come down on the political spectrum. You got to say Charlie's a true character. If you're going to write a book about Maine politics, he'd be in it. I get a feeling he's going to be back on the scene with his coalition, and they've already counted it up. I got an email earlier today, and there's 204 new taxes. I mean, that is such an easy soundbite to use. Yeah, I remember those ads. Charlie did a great job with it. He spearheaded the petition drive and got the thing back on the ballot, and then swept Republicans to great wins in 2010, basically on this issue. And that'll be the same thing. If you, I got to say, if you're an elected official and you vote for a budget that raises taxes on getting your hair cut, you'll see a beautician in an ad complaining about it, either in a mailer or a radio spot or even TV. So this is going to be great stuff. And again, it's going to, I mean, yeah, Democrats got hammered with this thing. I'll throw it back to Ben and Lizzy. How are you guys going to oppose? Mark Eves loves to talk about helping our seniors. Hey, this doubles the homestead exemption for those over 65 years old. How's Mark Eves going to oppose that?
But it also...
Bobby,
go ahead.
Oh, Ben, you can go.
Well, it also cuts the Drugs for the Elderly program, which is a massive $1 million program to help poor seniors and people on disabilities. I mean, they give with one and they take with the other. You talk about constituency groups. I mean, Paul LePage practically separated his shoulder, patting himself on the back so hard about repaying the hospitals. Now we have a tax plan where they're going to allow municipalities to tax, or the state will take property taxes on hospitals. I mean, you talk about building a coalition against this. I would think the hospitals would be front and center.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to that even more, I mean, we're eliminating revenue sharing, which automatically means municipalities are either going to have to make cuts or drive up property taxes. So for rural seniors, they're still going to be hurt by the revenue sharing. Yes, sure, he's doubling the homestead exemption. Great. He's also forcing municipalities to raise property taxes at the same time.
But he's cutting it for the rest of us. I mean, the homestead exemption goes away for everybody under 65. That's how I read it.
Right. Well, I mean, and you look at these middle-class Mainers in rural Maine who are living in towns that don't have hospitals to tax for property taxes, who are paying the highest income tax rate out of anyone, including the ultra-wealthy, who now are going to see their property taxes go up, and heck, they're going to be paying sales tax on things like paying someone to plow their driveway. You know, this is really harmful to those small rural communities that the Republicans tend to take for granted in election years. And I think that there's going to be backlash there. And overall, at the end of the day, we can talk about the politics as much as we want, but the question we have to answer is, do we think the state's going to be better off if this budget passes? And I don't think it's going to be. I think it's regressive. I think it takes more money out of the pockets of working class Mainers. It's a tax cut. It's a tax increase disguised as a tax cut.
So, Avery, isn't it too early to say that, really? I mean, aren't we looking at a very complicated piece of legislation here that if we take the governor's top level numbers to be correct, he's talking about a $300 million cut in taxes overall to the people of Maine. Shouldn't everybody just take kind of a deep breath and wait to see the math on this before they start panning it? Avery?
I'm guessing you're asking me. I'm cut out.
Sorry. Boy, we're staring at you.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a little too soon to make the judgment. There's so many moving parts here that it's hard to see. You can't have a quick and easy Excel spreadsheet to calculate what does this mean for me in terms of taxes, because there's so many different elements to it. But
don't they need that? I mean, isn't the governor going to need something like that to be able to sell this thing?
I think so. I think the $300 million, overall tax reduction is a good point. But people are going to want to know what does it mean for me? Definitely.
Yeah, and from some of the discussions I've had with people, it doesn't seem like that $300 million might come right away. That's $300 million in tax reductions extrapolated over a long period of time. Is that what you get from it as well?
I'm not exactly sure when the 300 kicks in, but the budget document does some interesting things. It's a 2-year. We're on a biannual budget cycle, and the phase down of the income tax is actually over 4 years. So you can certainly set that in statute, but you can't count on the next legislature abiding by those wishes, and frankly, we don't know who the next legislature is going to be right now.
So,
right, I mean,
Ben,
essentially, what we have again is the governor trying to pass tax cuts that he isn't necessarily paying for, and promising all the while you'll have a $300 million tax break or what have you, or we'll be paying $300 million less in taxes. Yet he's not paying for the tax break he's passing in 2018 and 2019.
So Ben, this is what I want to ask. Governor LePage won this last election in a pretty solid way. Republicans gained ground in the legislature. They took the Senate. And what I took away from that is that the people of Maine, they understand that the governor sometimes has a hard time with a microphone, and the communications and politics isn't his strong suit, but they trust him to do what's right with the government, much in the way that they would trust a CEO or someone who really knows a business to run it the right way. And it seems to me that Governor LePage is using that political capital now to really straighten out some imbalances in the state, some problems with municipalities being too redundant, and we were getting into this school administration issue. I mean, don't you have to give him credit for really taking his political capital right out of the gate and going and trying to fix Maine's economy finally?
Well, a couple things. I would give him more credit if he ran on these issues, and now he's trying to implement them. I think the level of trust he had with the Maine voters may go down a little bit. To me, this is a bit of a bait and switch. I mean, we heard nothing about a lot of these proposals through the whole campaign. I think it would have been nice, would have made maybe for a more interesting campaign. You know, whether it does what it does to the economy, I don't know. I mean, it just depends on your belief system. You know, if you believe in more aggressive taxation and lowering the income tax, that will improve Maine's economy, then you're going to like this. I'm a Democrat, so I don't happen to believe that. I think he's got a lot bigger problems before we get to what happens to the overall economy, because this is a political nightmare trying to get to the legislature. I'll tell you one thing: it's going to be full employment for the lobbyists.
I'd say so. Bobby Reynolds, as a student of politics, do you see any of the kind of Clinton-esque triangulation happening here? I mean, we've got Paul LePage now allied with conservative Democrats and people like Roger Cates that caused him such heartburn in his first term. I mean, is that what's going on here?
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting to watch play out, and it's fun to be on this show and throw the stuff back at Lizzy and Ben, where you talk about raising sales tax as a Democrat dream come true, and that's all tongue in cheek. I mean, this thing is it's
bold.
It's bold, yeah. It's complex, it's bold. All these great words. That $300 million number that's being thrown around, I gotta think. This is my gut tells me so. He can and his people can tell the realtors, look, there's going to be $300 million more in the pockets of Mainers to buy houses. So please don't come out and oppose this thing like you did 1495. I mean, how you're going to convince them to stay out of this thing, I don't know. This is going to bring together some very, very strange coalitions, some very strange bedfellows. It's Donald Sussman who funded most of the opposition to the people's veto of 1495. Is he now going to team up with Paul LePage on broad aspects of this thing? I don't know,
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. I mean, there's a million moving pieces here, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see this move along. It is a bold proposal, and I think the governor's taking a big risk, but I give him credit for trying to do something real. To wind up here, I want to go kind of down the line, and I want to ask you guys, there's like I said, a million pieces in this thing, but what one piece of this budget do you think is the most important? And I'll start with you, Avery.
I think the most difficult one, modernizing the sales tax. You got a million different constituents out there who are hating what's going on, but probably it's the right thing to do. That's why it's so difficult.
Ben, what's the most critical part of this budget, do you think?
It all goes back to the revenue sharing piece that we had a lot of debate about last year. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, but at its core, this is another attack on local services, local government, schools, police, fire. Avery talked about the constituencies who aren't going to like this. There's 1.3 million people in Maine who live in a town or a city who are going to be impacted by the revenue sharing cuts. It's the biggest piece. I think it's going to end up being his biggest problem.
Bobby, what do you think the most critical part of this is?
The tax reform aside, it's the relationship that state government will have with local municipalities on education, on general assistance, and on revenue sharing. Huge.
All right, Lizzy, what do you think the most critical part of this budget is?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most critical part of this budget is the fact that it slaps rural Maine and middle-class Mainers in the face, who are the people who really went and elected Governor LePage and traditionally support Republicans. It's a nightmare for them to have to walk into rural communities and explain why we're taking away revenue sharing, why we're jacking up the sales tax on middle-income earners, why we're also making them pay the highest tax rate on the income taxes. So, I think this is huge trouble down the line electorally.
All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us here on a Sunday afternoon. I appreciate you jumping in. Avery Day, thank you. Ben Grant, Lizzy Reinholt, Bobby Reynolds. I'm Lance Dutson for the Advance team. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.